Okay, so we're going to do the second part of the Forensic Careers notes. So you should have already done yesterday's in the Ed puzzle. If you haven't, I would go back and kind of start there. But we're going to finish up the careers today. So the next one is Forensic Psychiatry and Psychology. So what they're mostly going to be doing is evaluating offenders. So like looking at suspects we've already caught and evaluating their mental state. So deciding if they are able to stand trial. And then profiling criminals would be something that some might do after a suspect has already been caught, already been convicted, or is already in prison. They would want to profile those kind of murderers or that kind of criminal, because it may not be a murderer, but like that kind of criminal, to build a profile of like what kind of people generally end up becoming that kind of criminal. Because then we could use those profiles to find future suspects, like kind of narrow down our pool of like, well, who is more likely to convict that kind of crime, or just like what kind of upbringing do we need to look out for. So like kind of an example, if you've profiled a serial killer, they have noticed like there are some certain things that tend to be true for serial killers. One being they tend to have not a good backstory in their childhood, usually only have one parent in the home or don't have a parent in the home. It's usually the mother. They usually have a pretty poor relationship with the mother, as well as a lot of them have head trauma as a child. So might actually have issues with their actual brain because they had some form of head trauma growing up. So like that'd be kind of like an example of profiling them to catch future ones. So if I could just let it go. There we go. So this is Andre Chikatilo. This is just a case where they did profile this guy. So it's just an example of when forensic psychology was used. So basically, innocent or proven guilty. So they did have to decide in this case, like, was he mentally stable enough to stand trial? He did some crazy things in his trial, acting pretty insane. They actually had to keep him in this cage. So if you look at the picture at the bottom of the screen, here, I made my screen a little bigger. It's like, see these bars? It's because like when he was literally on trial, they kept him inside this cage because he kept like coming out at people. So definitely had some issues. I can't remember exactly if they put him in the asylum or not. I'm trying to see if it says it on here. No, but he was eventually put to death. So like he was, they decided that he was able to stand trial, even though like he was acting quite crazy, because they could prove that he premeditated his murder. So that's kind of like the plea of insanity that some people try to pull. A forensic psychologist is the one that decides, were you insane at the time, or did you know what you were doing? So if they can prove that you really did have some kind of mental issue that made you like not even know you were doing whatever crime you're committing, then you could get the plea of insanity. But most of the time, they can't prove that. Most of the time, you can prove that they did know they were doing something wrong, and most of the time, the way they do that is by showing premeditation of the crime. So, I mean, he did the same crime to over here. It says over 53 victims. He killed women and children, so basically just people weaker than him. He just preyed on anyone that he could overpower. And he was mostly around a train station, I'm pretty sure. Basically, he would just lure people around this train station, and he would brutally attack them and murder them. So the way he was caught, though, was they did actually profile the serial killer. So psychologists brought on, they profiled what they thought a person who would do this kind of crime, and looking at the victim profiles and things like that, and they built of who do they think would be the kind of person that would do this, and it actually did narrow them down to not very many suspects, and he was one of them. And then they found him in the area and like literally kind of caught him trying to lure, I can't remember if it was a woman or a child in that scenario, but then after they got him on trial, he admitted all of it. So like this right here, this picture is him demonstrating to the police officers what he did. Like he literally walked them through exactly what he did in his crimes, which doesn't normally happen, but all of that was through a psychologist helping out. Click, click. Okay, there we go. So next career we're going to look at is a forensic engineer. So if you have not been interested in like the more gory kind of crimes and like murder and things, sorry, it's the end of the day. This would be definitely different. So forensic engineering investigate a number of topics, including like just product liability. So like if a company makes this car that they tell their consumers that it should not flip over, that it should not be top heavy, but then several car accidents show that it is definitely more likely to roll, something like that. That'd be product liability. So like you're promoting your product that isn't safe. If you remember, what was it? It was like that board that could hover. It was like a hoverboard. And they kept blowing up at people's houses. Like they'd have them on the charger and it kept catching fire. So, I mean, that was a big deal. And that was something that obviously they didn't do enough safety testing before they put that on the market. So the company who made that would be liable to be sued. So a lot of these cases, you could sue the people that should have done a better job making these things. They also handle like structure collapses. So like if people didn't build like bridges correctly or roadways correctly or housing places that ended up caving in, like stuff like that. Any of those things that are usually kind of considered accidents, but if it was the company's fault for not doing all the things they were supposed to do to be safe for people, they didn't follow the safety laws, then you can certainly sue them. So engineering is certainly a good profession to get into. It's definitely well paid, but it is like a more math heavy course, and you would have to go to school for engineering and then kind of specialize in forensics. Okay, so now we have a forensic artist. So I've had several people be interested in artistry. A lot of like it used to be sketching. The sketching is not as big of a deal anymore. We have a lot better computer programs to work in, so this could be more digital now than just like drawing it. But you could draw it and then make a digital animation. They also use it to do like age progression portraits. So if like a person went missing that was fairly young, so like maybe an 11-year-old went missing, but then we're still looking for them a couple of years later, well, they're going to look different. You know, there's going to be some difference in age. Same thing with like if you had a suspect, you know, in their 20s, and now it's 10 years later. Sometimes we still haven't solved the case, and you're like, well, this was our suspect back then, but we can't find them. Like maybe they fled to a different state or a different country, something like that. And you'd progress their age of like, this is what you'd be looking like now, probably. We've added 10 to 20 years to what their face should look like. They also can do reconstruction. So this is an example of like trying to reconstruct what someone's face looks like from a skeleton. It's not a perfect science yet. It's definitely still being figured out because it's hard to know like how thick exactly to make different parts. But with practice, people have gotten fairly good results with trying to build a face from a skull. And then they can put that face out on the news, and then someone can say, hey, I recognize that. That's like it looks like my missing cousin or my missing neighbor or something like that. So there actually has been cases solved where they posted the picture and someone recognized them and called in and said, I think I know who that is. So certainly can still have a place in the careers. Then we have ballistics. So forensic ballistics is the science of analyzing firearms, bullets, bullet impacts. So anything to do with firearms, so guns for the most part. Ballistic fingerprinting is analyzing a firearm evidence, I can't talk now, to determine if that particular firearm was used in a crime. So as an example, if someone was shot, and then we think this is our suspect, and we found guns in their possession, like they were in their trunk or in their car or something, and we're trying to prove, is this the weapon that shot our victim? Ballistic fingerprinting, it actually, like, it's not creating like a fingerprint, but it's a marking along the bullet shell. So if you didn't know, each gun, even if it's the same brand of gun, same style of gun, makes a specific marking around the bullets as it shoots, that it would be specific to that gun. It's like a fingerprint, like your finger. That's why they call it ballistic fingerprinting. So they could take that gun into custody, take it to a firing range and do some practice rounds and see if the markings on our practice bullets look like the ones found in the victim. And they have to be like exact matches because it is like perfect little specific markings to that gun. There's also quite a bit of like math that goes into ballistics. So it's like trajectory, the angle at which a gun was fired, where should it be heading towards, the trajectory inside of a body. You can kind of determine how tall the shooter was based on how, where the bullet went in and the angle of the bullet went in. We'll go through that more later in the year. Then forensics computer science. So we have, it's like it sounds. They use this criminal use of technology and electronic records. So this is a definitely growing field. Anything that has to do with computers is a growing field right now, because that's what we're all moving towards. There's so much crime that can be found online, so it's definitely a big market for this job. So you're definitely going to be able to find work. We can catch a lot of people through following their internet records now. Things like almost everything you do online, we can backtrack and check it. So it's a lot easier to even map people where they're going. There's a lot more GPS things on us than we realize usually. So anything to do with computers or your phones, or just anything digital, anything technology, who has a whole realm in forensic science. So this is just an example case. So I've been trying to show y'all like example cases throughout this. And so here is BTK. So BTK was another pretty famous serial killer. And weirdly enough, he was actually one that he killed. It has his victims here on this page. Several close together, and the whole town was scared because he was just breaking into homes, just kind of, it almost seemed random, and just killing whoever he found in there. It did seem like he was targeting women, but if there were men home, then he killed them too. So it was definitely scary for families, because he was breaking into, sometimes they were like whole families in there. He would kill them all, and like his BTK means he would bind them, so tie up, torture to some degree, and then kill them. So definitely was not a good story. And then sadly, he quit killing, or it seemed like he quit killing for a while, but sadly as in they didn't catch him. So he quit. They couldn't find any more evidence. Nothing was going on. The case was cold for a long time. I can't remember. I think it was 15 to 20 years, like just nothing. And then randomly he sent this CD to the police officers, asking, actually, I sent him a message first. He sent him a message saying, "Can I send you a CD with like information on it? Would you be able to track me?" And of course, the cops messaged him back saying, "No, we couldn't track you that way." Which, yes, we can. So he sent in the CD-ROM, and basically we could find the location on that CD of where the CD was made, and it tracked him back to a church. Actually, it was the church that he went to, that he copied the file onto it on that computer. Like, you could see what computer he created that copy at. And so we didn't know exactly what it was. We just knew it was at this church, but it had a name attached to the file he sent. He had named it with his name, which now I forget what it is. Is it Richard or something? Now I'm forgetting. But his name was on the file, so they looked through like the church directory to see who had that name, and there was only one. There was one guy that had that name. So called him in and ended up matching his DNA through his daughter to one of the victims. But anyways, that was all how they finally caught him was a digital tracing back to which computer he was using on that CD he sent in, which was just kind of crazy, because he basically turned himself in by giving that to the police officers. He was one of the killers that routinely would send things to the police, or he would put like an article in the newspaper. He would take out an ad. I don't know how they couldn't trace that. I guess he put an anonymous ad in but still paid for it, so they ran it. But he would communicate with police officers and kind of taunt them, and then he just disappeared. 20 years later, comes back, sends them a CD, and he's caught. So weird computer case. Okay, so to the services of the crime laboratory, I'm going to run through these real fast because I don't even think you have to know all these by heart. But it's just showing you that sometimes if you're not in a specific job, you might be in a unit. So depending on the crime lab that you work in, you might be in a group where you do a couple different jobs instead of just one main one. Depends on how big your department is. So there could be a physical science unit, and they would do anything that involves chemistry, physics, or geology. So just collecting any kind of physical evidence to analyze. So that could be drug analysis, soil and mineral analysis, any kind of trace evidence like hair and fibers, things like that. Then we have the biology unit. The biology unit would be anything biological. So it could be blood, body fluids, botanical samples, that's like plant samples. Could also be hair and fiber. And they do DNA profiling. Then there's the firearms unit, so anything that has to do with a weapon, basically. So discharge bullets, cartridge cases, shot